Hello everyone. I'm back to talk to you today about a few things on the heartwarmer cowl. So today I've got a few different things that I wanted to cover. I had a question over on Ravelry in my private message box about working, oops, I bumped the camera, sorry about that, about working the lace and cable section and whether it mattered if you slipped your stitches on the SSK as if to purl or as if to knit. And I'm glad you asked. Let me show you the difference between those two techniques and you can decide which one you like better. So remember on the cowl, you'll be working it from this direction down. So this was your cast on edge right here, and this is the first section that you'll be working. So you can see that I did two different types of slipping when I worked this section. This first section, the slip, slip, knit was done where I slipped the stitches as if to purl. And you'll see that it creates kind of a stair-step effect on this side, whereas your knit two together tends to be a little bit smoother. Most instructions will tell you to work your slip, slip knits like this. But you can see that there is a difference in how those two diagonal lines look next to the yarn overs. On this section, and I did this on purpose so that I could show you guys this, I slipped these stitches as if to knit. So let me show you the difference between those here in a minute. This gives you a line that will match more closely the knit two togethers on this side. It's kind of a smoother diagonal, and this is more of a stair-step diagonal. Both work, both will decrease a stitch down, but there's a difference between how they are accomplished. So if I was to work a slip, slip, knit, as most instructions tell you to do, you would slip, slip, and then knit. That's one option. The other option, which gives you the more diagonal, smooth diagonal approach, like this section here, was accomplished by going into my stitches this way. So I'm actually turning them on the needle, and then when I knit them together, it still decreases down one stitch, but when I have several of these stacked, it will create a smoother diagonal line. So depending on your personal preference, because neither is wrong and neither is right, it will change how the hearts look on yours. If you work the second way I just showed you, you'll have a more distinct diagonal line, which I think highlights the sort of heart motif a little bit better. If you work the slip, slip as if to purl, it will give you this slightly more raised, more textural stair-step look. So again, your preference, and neither way is right or wrong. It's just how you would like your little heart motifs to look. If you have any other questions about the lace and cable section, please let me know. I'll be happy to do a video on them. But I wanted to move on today to talk to you about the bobble section. So focusing on the bobbles next, these are a great textural element that's included in this cowl, and I know they're not everybody's favorite to work on. I think they're kind of fun, but just remember that if you would prefer not to work the bobbles, that you could do a simple noop where there's less back and forth manipulation, or you could choose to add beads on in this section where they're indicating a bobble is supposed to happen. So you've got options if you don't love working bobbles, but I'm going to walk you through working one so you can if you decide you'd like to do that. So your pattern is going to tell you that you're working this on a plain stockinette stitch background, which we've got here. Each of the bobbles is going to be worked into one stitch. So when you get to the point in the instructions that it tells you to make a bobble, you're going to be dealing with just this next stitch on your needle. So for the first step, I'm going to knit one into that stitch, Leave this on the needles. Don't let it slip off the left-hand needle. I'm going to work a yarn over. I'm going to work another knit stitch into that stitch on my left-hand needle. So now I've got 3 stitches into 1. I'm now going to do another yarn over. And finally, I'm going to do one final stitch into that initial stitch we started with and slip it off the left-hand needle. I like to kind of snug my yarn up here, and you'll see while I was working those yarn overs, I was using my left-hand thumb to help hold these initial 3 stitches kind of in place, because you do wind up stretching this stitch out quite a bit that you've worked all of them into. So I like to give it a little tug, kind of close up that hole just a little bit. Now the next step, even though you're working in the round, is going to be to go to flip your yarn and working material to the back. And now you're going to be working on the wrong side, and you're going to purl each of those 5 stitches that you created on the first row. So working these extra stitches all in one is what is going to create that kind of vertical height that is what makes a bobble a bobble. So you're in essence knitting across this puffy surface right now. Okay, so I've purled those 5 stitches. I'm going to switch back to the front of my work, to the right side of my work. Okay, and I'm going to knit those 5 stitches yet again. So I'm going to knit into each one of those. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the wrong side of my work, and I'm basically going to gather up half of these stitches, meaning I'm going to get rid of half of them. So to do that, I'm going to purl the first 2 stitches together, snug that up. I'm going to purl by itself the middle stitch. Okay, and now I'm gonna purl the final 2 stitches of that original 5 together. Okay, so now I'm down to 3 stitches instead of 5. I'm gonna go back to the front of my work. I'm gonna slip 1 stitch. I'm gonna knit 2 stitches together. And then I'm going to pass this first slipped stitch up and over. So it's going to pull all of those stitches together, and then I would continue working my regular knit stitches exactly as the pattern calls for. There's plain stockinette in between each bobble, so you'll have some plain stockinette stitches. When I go to knit the first stitch after I make the bobble, that's the plain stockinette, I do pull that a little bit tighter. And on the next round, when you come around, when you go to work this stitch, that's where you've combined all the stitches down, be sure to also knit this one and give it a little bit of a tug so that it pulls the stockinette background over a little bit closer. And it will help close up some of the gaposis that you may find. So you'll see there's not much of a gap underneath here. Where I find there tends to be a gap is either right before or right after this single stitch. And you can fix that to some extent on the next round as you come around, as I said, to tighten up on your gauge tension between that stitch and that stitch. So that'll give you a nice textural little bobble that will sit up on the surface of your work. You'll see there are some little tiny gauge discrepancies after the bobble, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If it bothers you, you could always go back at the very end and duplicate stitch the hole closed. It certainly doesn't bother me enough to worry about it. But if you are someone who is interested in working on Aran sweaters in the future, many of the traditional patterns utilize this technique, so it's a good one to know. There are different size bobbles. Some of them will only have 3 stitches. We did 5. Some of them will even have 7. After that, it gets a little unwieldy. They get very, very big. But it's a great tool to have in your tool chest if you have interest in working textured type garments. Now, I'm not going to cover the interrupted rib or the broken rib, so that's these two. I will have another quick tutorial for the smocking portion. And if you do have questions about either of the ribbing sections, please contact me on Ravelry or private message me, and I will be glad to shoot videos for both of those. They're relatively straightforward, but if you're confused at all about them, I am glad to put them on the needles and get you guys some instruction. So next week, look for the smocking pattern, and we'll be kind of in the home stretch on this fun little design then. So I hope you all are enjoying knitting it. Again, if you have any other questions, please hit me up in the Ravelry group. I'll be glad to help. Happy knitting!